have the honor of introducing our guest speaker tonight, our keynote address for the conference here, Pat Reynolds. Pat's a restoration ecologist with more than 30 years of professional experience in habitat restoration, including the effective use of native seed. He's the general manager at Heritage Growers, a source-identified native seed plant supply company that is a venture of the River Partners. Pat sits on the board of the California Native Grasslands Association, the Yolo County Planning Commission, and is the restoration ecologist on the Science and Technology Advisory Committee for the Yolo County Habitat Agency. In his copious spare time, he manages to do all of this stuff. This evening, I'm very excited for this talk tonight. Pat's going to share with us how the Heritage Growers produces restoration-appropriate native seed and plants, and how these plant materials are helping support large-scale restoration projects in California. So please welcome Pat Reynolds.
Thank you, Russell, and good evening, everyone. When I first started coming to this conference back in 2017, I was pretty intimidated. This is the place where the highest level botanists in California come to learn about new technical information on botany. So to be invited as the guest note speaker here 8 years later, it's quite the honor. But I think maybe it's a bit of a sign of the times, right? I think there's never been a time more when we needed to do large-scale conservation, and there's never been a greater emphasis on native seed, and I think today is really, it's the heyday for native seed, so perhaps it's appropriate. So anyway, with that today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the origin story of Heritage Growers, how we produce source-identified native seed of known genetic origin, and then a little bit on some of the projects that we're working on that sort of give you a sense for how seed is being used in California. So with that, here we go. So first and foremost, Heritage Growers is a venture of River Partners, and River Partners is a nonprofit organization, so that makes Heritage Growers a nonprofit organization, which is kind of unique in the native seed industry. And with that, back in 2021, Michelle Ranieri, our operations manager, and I first started talking to Julie Rentner, the president of River Partners, about the idea of setting up a source-identified native seed venture with River Partners. And it turns out River Partners for many, many years had been entertaining the idea of setting up a native seed company, but hadn't had an opportunity to do so until we came along. And so we ended up having a series of conversations about that, and by the fall of 2021, we ended up, putting our first crops in the ground where we grew out, 17 or 18 different items, across around a dozen acres. And now here it is, 4 years later, we're in our fourth growing season. We're at 208 acres. We've got more than 200 items in the ground. So it's really taken off in quite a spectacular fashion. Anyway, so, whenever we talk about native seed, I think we need to talk about John Anderson. John Anderson was a legendary conservationist, right? He's a guy that was a veterinarian at UC Davis, and he had some farmland in Yolo County, north of Winters, where, he wanted to put some habitat on his farmland, and in the process of doing that, he found out there wasn't very much, locally sourced material. There wasn't, seed of known genetic origin, available to make this habitat on his farm. And so the guy, as a 50-some-year-old guy, a veterinarian, at UC Davis, changes careers, and he figures out how to grow source-identified native seed, which is really complicated. And he didn't have a lot of models for that, right? And so for him to have done that, it's just extraordinary, right? And so I think, I certainly wouldn't be here today. There would be no Heritage Growers without John Anderson. And, Joe Silvera, he described Heritage Growers as the evolutionary outcome of the work of John Anderson, and I really think that's the case. So we're all very lucky to have John Anderson having figured out how to do that. So now we have the seed available for habitat restoration. Okay, so native seed it's an economy. It's like no other economy in the world. There's been a series of studies that have been conducted that talk about, source identified native seed. There was a national native seed strategy that came out in 2015, talked about the strange situation that we're in, trying to match supply and demand. The California Native Seed Strategy came out here a couple of years ago. It was developed by CNPS, did a really nice job, actually much better than the National Native Seed Strategy. And with that, they sort of laid out a little bit more better goals, including a lot more information on ecological restoration. But then a report came out from the National Academies of Science, an assessment of native seed and the capacity for their supply. And I'm going to talk to you about that in some detail here. It really kind of tells you a little bit about like how strange the native seed market is, right? So one of the things about native seed, source identified native seed, restoration appropriate native seed, is that the supply is not sufficient to meet the demand, right? We need more native seed. We have to have the seed in order to do large scale conservation. In order to grow out the seed, it requires specialized knowledge, right? And that specialized knowledge is held in the hands of a few. You need special equipment, and it takes a lot of money to be able to sort of put a farm together and start growing this out cost effectively. Also, it's funny in that there's a lot of disincentives to putting a farm like this together. A lot of times these projects come along where there's large seed sales that are required, and essentially you have to have that seed on the shelf. So it's kind of a risky business, right? And you have to, in many ways, you have to have that seed available in order to sell it. And sometimes, you'll have a big year one year and a much smaller year the next. I think we're getting better, in terms of habitat restoration for planning for these projects, but still, you have to basically invest a lot of money, have that seed on the shelf so it's ready when these projects come along. And then if you really have a large project, if you want to have that seed available, you need adequate lead time, right? Sometimes it might take 3 or 4 or 5 years before you can produce thousands of pounds of restoration appropriate seed. And also there's a lot of technical difficulties, growing out this new seed. Ed Kleiner today, what did he say? He said, trying to grow out wild seed and on the farm is like what did he say? He's like taming a Tasmanian devil. It's crazy. It's like Wolverine. He's like, yeah, that's right. Thank you. Yeah, yes. I'm glad you guys were paying attention. Anyway, there's been a lot of media coverage on native seed, which is great. So again, I think it is the heyday for native seed. There's national publications like Bloomberg are putting out, articles on native seed. NPR is doing stories on native seed. So, we're getting the attention that we need to make native seed more widely available. So I'm going to talk to you today about the process of growing out source-identified native seed. There's a lot of planning that's involved in that. There's wildland seed collection. There's planting with specialized equipment. There's harvesting. There's a lot of work that goes into cleaning the seed. And then there's all the work of sort of mixing and bagging and tagging and get the seed out for projects. And I'll talk to each one of those in some detail. But before I do, as it turns out, the hardest part of growing out native seed is the inventory management and the accounting. It's crazy, Michelle Ranieri, our operations manager, she's constantly having to track all of the complex details associated with sort of tracking the seed from the wild, having it grow through the whole process of growing out, having it cleaned, having it tested, and then getting out the door. So at the end of the day, it's really the inventory management ends up being the hardest part, at least as far as I'm concerned. I thought it was going to be learning how to grow the seed out, but it really is it's the inventory management and the accounting. So amplification planning is a big part of the process, right? So it's kind of a year-round activity. We're constantly looking at new projects and new grants and new opportunities for that. But we really start to refine that in the summer, trying to figure out what it is that we can plant in any given year. So we have to look at things like, the inventory that's in place, the yields that we expect, on the crops that are already in the ground. We have to use a crystal ball to figure out the demand. We want to make sure we sort of have covered our contracts and our grants, right? And a lot of the limitations are based on the stock seed, that wildland seed that's available for us to be able to plant. Yeah. And a big part of it, of course, is we want to maintain that genetic integrity, right? So what we're doing is growing out seed, restoration-appropriate seed that comes from a particular region that should have those wildland genetics present, right? They're going to be adapted to those local soils and insects and diseases. It's really important that we implement those BMPs to essentially allow us to maintain those local genetics as much as possible. So there's a group, the California Crop Improvement Association, CCIA, and they've developed some guidelines for lots of native seed, and we're working with a group on that to help additional guidelines. But we look at things like isolation distances, if something is selfing or crossing, if it's bee pollinated, if it's wind pollinated, things like that. You look at crop history, you want to make sure you're not planting a poppy from another ecotype in the same crop a couple of years later, because some of that material could come up and contaminate it, for example. And then the generations, right? It's really important that you maintain those generations, keep those as low as possible, because the seed is going to start to evolve towards the conditions in the farm, right? You can imagine, like when you're growing out this seed, it's being irrigated, it's on beautiful farm soils, it's getting harvested at the same time. So for each and every passing generation, it starts to evolve towards the conditions of the farm. So you want to keep those generations as low as possible. So we're doing the planning, but really we need that wildland seed, in order to allow us to be able to grow out the plants and the seeds that we have for our projects. Haley Holgate, our assistant seed collection manager, she drives all around the state, throughout the year, basically collecting seed all over the place. We hire seasonal botany technicians to come out and assist with that. And by the way, we have a couple of positions that we're hiring for. So if anybody's interested in that, come see us. We have a table right over there, Heritage Growers. And it takes a lot of work of collaboration with partners in order to be allowed to collect that seed. And kind of the process is you need to obtain the permission to collect the seed, right? There's a lot of scouting, right? You have to go out and make sure you find those robust stands of seed to collect from. You have to monitor for ripeness, which is its own process, takes a lot of time. You have to collect it properly, and then you have to make sure you transport it and process it properly in order to get that high viability within your seed. So kind of go into a little bit of detail about some of these things. So the obtaining the permission to collect it, it varies quite a bit depending upon the landowner. If it's a private landowner, it could be as easy as an email or a phone call. If it's a public agency, it might take a prolonged permit process to be able to collect that seed. It might cost money. Might get denied. So in the process, though, it's really important to develop positive relationships with those landowners, right? They're letting you onto their lands to be able to collect that seed. So you want to make sure that you're doing things the way they'd like you to do it, right? You're following their rules, et cetera, et cetera. You're not letting their cows out or what have you in the process, right? Yeah. And then you have to kind of adapt your communication style, as part of it. So some people are good with texts, and some people phone calls, and some people want extensive communications and annual reports and things like that. So all of that's an important part of the process. And then the scouting is a really important part of finding those materials. You want to make sure that the stuff that you're collecting is actually the species that you think it is, right? So that's where the botany comes in, right? Yeah. So our collection crews, they go out with the Jepson, right, as part of that. And if we're not sure, we take the samples to herbaria, for proper identification. We started depositing voucher specimens in herbaria as part of that as well, which is, I think, important and good. And depending upon the location and how easy it is to access, you develop kind of a collection strategy that includes when to collect and things like that. And then you have to evaluate the capacity to be able to collect that site. So In some cases, you might be able to just drive your car up and get out and collect the seed. Other places, you might have to walk a mile or two, and carry back whatever seed you might have available. So anyway, so you have to sort of think about like how much seed you can collect and how much level of effort it's going to take to get that seed collected. So the monitoring for ripeness is a really important part of the process, right? So, you want to make sure that you collect that seed at the right time, If you end up collecting that seed too early, it's going to have low viability. If you collect it too late, the seed could be lost. It could fall off the plants, right? So you want to make sure you're looking at the entire population, not an individual. You don't want to get tricked and find one plant that has ripe seed and the rest doesn't, and go to collect it and find yourself not collecting at the right time, right? You want to note, signs of predation. We did a collection of Clarkia cylindrica, spectacular collection. Must have been 1 million plants up in the hills outside of Bakersfield. We're all set up, ready to go, monitored for ripeness, and then came in and collected the material, and almost all of it was gone. I think a herd of elk had come in as part of that, right? Yeah, it's crazy, yeah. So you have to also monitor for weather patterns also, so if you end up with a heat spell, that seed is going to ripen a lot faster. If it's cool and wet and damp, it's gonna hold. So you have to monitor for that as you make your, strategies for collection. Also, sometimes it might take several collections in order to get the seed at the right time. So then, when you're collecting the material, you want to make sure you're collecting the least amount of material possible, right? Because any of the other vegetative material that you collect, that has to be cleaned out, right? So you definitely want to make sure you're collecting as little material and as much seed as possible. You want to avoid cross-contamination, right? We know that plants can grow together, you don't want to go and collect Lastinian and find out there's 2 or 3 species that are growing together and you're trying to collect that, so you have to be really careful on how you collect. And then also, it's kind of a sexy job to be able to go out and collect seed, right? It's very cool. Everybody wants to collect seed, right? Yeah. But it's hard work, It's like Haley and her crews. They would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, working out in the Tulare Basin in the San Joaquin Valley, making sure they could get all their collections done before those 110-degree temperatures hit, for example. So you have to be really careful with that, right? Drink lots of water, avoid the heat, take plenty of breaks, things like that. It's part of the process. And then also you have to expect the unexpected, right? So, we're talking about the importance of monitoring for ripeness, so going out there time and time again to make sure you're going out to collect things at the right time. And like Haley was telling me about how, she had been monitoring this population of milkweed, and she went out there and ready to collect, and she gets out there and it had burned, right? All this work that had gone into like getting ready to collect the seed, and you get out there and a fire had taken the seed out, right? So you have to be able to adapt to conditions. So kind of moving now on to planting, right? So it kind of goes back to this, you've figured out what you're going to grow, you've got the seed that you've collected, and you have to go and lay out this field out, these seeds, these crops out into the fields, right? So you have to make sure you're planting things in the correct location. We're trying to maintain isolation distances so that we can maintain those local genetics. So we have to lay things out properly. So we seed with a custom-made Truax drill. So I think some of you that have implemented restoration projects, I'm sure you've used Truax drills, right? And so they are in and of themselves a custom drill that's used for wildland restoration. But we had to have the drill that was built to plant on beds, right? So basically went through this process working with Jim Truax during COVID to try to figure out how to build this drill. It took months and months and months to have it built. It was built in Minnesota. We had to have it shipped across the country. It was further fabricated in Meridian near our farm, and finally had that ready to go for seeding. Cost more than $50,000 just for that drill. Weighs more than 6,000 pounds, so you have to have a giant tractor in order to seed with, 150 horse tractor plus. Whenever possible, we want to be able to direct seed. You want to put direct seed directly in the ground to get a much better yield. It's much more effective to do that. But oftentimes what we have to do is we have to start these fields out in plugs, right? So we have to go and take the seed that we've collected, grow out plugs to the tune of around 25,000 plugs per acre and plant them in the ground. And oftentimes when you do plug planted fields, sometimes you could not have any yield during that first year because it's plug planted versus if you had directly seeded, you start to get production that first year. And then also it's, we're working on new ecotypes and new species that are always different, right? So we have to come up with new creative ways to be able to figure out how to establish new fields. So the field maintenance is mostly just irrigation and weed control, right? So in normal years, we'll use sprinklers to germinate the seed, and then once the plants are starting to establish, in the springtime, we'll end up using buried drip tape to maintain that. Last year, the weather patterns were such that we didn't have to irrigate at all. We were able to seed, get these huge rainfall events that came in, and basically we didn't actually turn on the irrigation system at all, which was remarkable. But by far, the biggest effort, the most substantial effort for growing out, for the maintenance of this native seed is weed control, right? It's really important to keep those weeds out of that field, right? So if you can't keep the weeds out of the field, it's going to be hard to clean those out. So we're really trying to produce high quality seeds, seed that has very high purity and viability. So we cultivate, we have cultivators on our tractors. We use herbicides using various different sort of strategies to try to be able to, keep the weeds out of the field. But by far, the most expensive part of the whole operation is actually labor crews. So we spent more than $1,000 per acre with labor crews just hoeing out weeds. So to give you kind of a sense for the sort of the importance of weed control and the cost of controlling those weeds. So part of the seed production process starts with once we've called ripeness, once we've decided when it's time to sort of cut the material, we use a machine called a swather primarily, which is like a giant lawnmower. It's 15 feet wide. It cuts the material in a 15-foot wide, a 3-bed swath, if you will, that then puts the material in a narrow linear band of material called a windrow. And then with that windrow, we very carefully monitor that. Just as soon as that material is dry enough for us to thresh, to get the combine out, to be able to sort of thresh that material, then we do that immediately because we don't want to lose that seed that's sitting in that field material, and it allows us to be able to pick it up as well as part of the process. And then, one of the primary machines that we use is a combine, right? It's like it's a remarkable piece of equipment. It's been around for more than 150 years. It does this incredible job of separating the seed from the chaff. Really, what we're really trying to do is get as much of that seed in the tank and as much as everything else out the back of that combine. It's really the first step in the cleaning process, if you will. It threshes that material. It gets it to the point where we're able to clean that in our seed mill. But the thing is, and what we have to do, when we're growing out this native seed is that in each and every step of the process, it takes hours and hours of time to be able to clean out the particular the seed from the various pieces of equipment. So for the combine, for example, it takes about 10 hours of time, 10 man hours between each time we use that combine, right, to clean that out. So, using air and water and sort of getting out all of that seed out of the nooks and crannies because we don't want to contaminate the next seed that comes out of it, right? So, and that's the case in everything we do. Every step of the process requires this substantial amount of cleaning, which is one of the reasons why production of the seed is so expensive. It's just so labor intensive to keep things so clean. Sometimes we actually have to harvest the material by hand. Sometimes the material it's not, the seed doesn't ripen at the same time. Milkweed is a perfect example of that. If we really wanted to maximize yields on milkweed, we'd go out every other day for a month to pick those pods off the plants, right? We don't do that because it's like, it makes the seed even more expensive. But you know, we spend a lot of time, you know, hand harvesting milkweed for sure. Anyway, a very labor-intensive process, and another reason why the seed is so expensive to produce. And then once the seed is cut and it's, you know, it's curing in the fields, like I said, it has to be dry enough for that combine to pick it up and thresh it. Once that material has been picked up by the combine, we actually dump that material out onto tarps in the field, right? This threshed material, and we have to make sure that that material gets, you know, sufficiently dried before we can clean it. You know, we target less than 10% moisture content. Usually, it's around 6 or 8% moisture content. Not only is it harder to clean when the moisture content is higher, but it's also, we think that the viability of that seed will drop if you try to clean that before it's been adequately dried. Anyway, it's a labor-intensive process. Sometimes folks are out there flipping those piles of seed by hand on a daily basis, you know, to try to get that even drying, right? It's part of the process. So. And then we move on to cleaning that seed, right, which is its own very technically difficult part of the process. So we were talking earlier about the wildland seed collecting. So these wildland seed collections are much smaller than what we produce on the farm, so they require a different set of cleaning processes. A lot of that seed is cleaned by hand, but we also have smaller machinery that we use for cleaning. If you look at that photo on the upper right there, it's a desktop clipper. It's like a mini version of the big cleaner that we use in the mill. But sometimes we have to be innovative as part of the process. Like, you know, Mason Shorts, our seed cleaning manager, he's really creative and works really hard. So here's like a little wind tunnel that he built to try and clean some really fluffy seeds. So I'll show you that. So you can see it kind of, you know, the heavier seed the seed basically drops out at the beginning, then all of the chaff ends up at the end of it, right? Sometimes we have to use, like Mason built this kind of mini thresher where it's like a long drill that he welded some cable onto it, and he uses that drill to be able to thresh the material. So it's you know, lots of innovations to figure out how to clean out the seed. But most of our seed is done through our seed cleaning mill. It's a mill that has 3 separate sets of machines. Typically, goes through a cleaner, which has a series of screens that, you know, shake and blow and move the seed from location to location. It goes then to what's called an indent, which is this dimpled cylinder that spins around and it separates the seed by shape. And then finally, it goes to what's called a gravity table, which is basically a machine that separates things by weight, and I'll show you what the gravity table looks like here. So, and then here's a little movie of the gravity table. So with that, you can kind of see what we're trying to do is we're trying to hold on to that real heavy seed, right? Because that heavy seed is going to have the high viability versus the lighter seed. So, you know, if you see those, the photo on the left there, you see those 4 different garbage cans. You know, we'll toss probably the 2 cans on the left and keep the 2 on the right, perhaps, depending upon the seed that we're cleaning. Yeah, and then the final product, of course, is you know, clean seed. Hopefully, very clean seed that has a lot of high purity and hopefully has a lot of high viability. Right. All the seed is stored typically in 50-pound bags. And then when we get seed orders, we mix that seed together. And the way we do it now is we basically take that seed and we put it on the floor of the warehouse and we mix it up with shovels. We have a mixer, but there's some electrical work we have to do, and we're a nonprofit, so we can't do everything at the same time, right? So. Okay, so storage of the seed is really important, right? You know, it's a living product, right? So the viability of that seed drops through time. So one of the kind of fun things that we did is we build climate-controlled storage at Heritage Growers. It's a facility that we built that we're trying to reduce the amount of the amount of moisture content and temperature, and so we're trying to shoot for having the moisture content in degrees in Fahrenheit be 100 or less year-round as part of that. So it really can substantially, it can make the seed much viable for much longer. And we use this to store our really important seed, the wildland genetics, the material that we're going to be using to grow out seed in the future, or the stuff that's got the low generations, right? The stuff that's come out in the generation 1 or 2. Because kind of going back to this concept that we want to maintain those wildland genetics, right? We don't want to continuously take one generation, use that material, grow it out again, because each and every step of the process, you start to lose some of those wildland genetics, right? So we try to use our cold storage facility to basically hold on to those that seed, make it last longer, so we can pull it out year after year after year, and keep those generations low. So seed testing is a really important part of the process. What we're trying to do is produce seed that has high purity and high viability. And, there's various measures that you get with the seed test, like you see on the bottom left there. It has measures of other crop and weed content, and if there's the presence of noxious weeds. If we have a single noxious weed within our seed, we can't sell it. So it's really important that we clean the seed, and like we were talking about earlier, we really need to keep those weeds out of the fields, because you can't necessarily clean it all in the cleaning mill. So we like to use high quality labs so that we feel like, the data that's coming out is reflective of what's in the bag. So that's really important. And one of the important numbers that we get is the number of live seeds per pound, because we use that number, the number of live seeds per pound, in everything that we do. When we develop seed mix designs for restoration projects, we're looking at live seeds per square foot, and you have to start out with the live seeds per pound, which then translates into the application rates. Also with the farm, same thing. Generally we're targeting around 600,000 live seeds per acre, and so we have to have this test with accurate data in order for us to be able to plant appropriately. So a lot of the work that we're doing, and more than half of the items that we're growing out today, is through contract grows, right? Contract grow seed amplifications, where we work with different groups, federal, state, local agencies, public and private folks working that really need local material for their projects that isn't commercially available. And so what we'll do is we'll get the wildland seed, or maybe we'll collect it for them, that we then amplify, we then grow out in their field. So we take their pound of seed and we turn that into 50 pounds, if you will, growing that out into our farm. Again, we always want to directly seed if we can, right? Because you get much better yields, a much better product. But again, a lot of times we have to grow these things out into plugs first. It's just the nature of the wildland seed. There's lots of limitations with wildland seed. Getting enough wildland seed to be able to produce what you need. But one of the great things about these contract grow seed amplifications is that it's a means to get more material out there that's commercially available. Oftentimes we're able to keep those fields in once we've fulfilled our contract, so then that later becomes seed that's available for all of us to use for habitat restoration projects. We also have a nursery operation, and with that nursery operation, we're able to grow out basically everything that we grow out and produce seed from, right? More than 200 items can be grown out, right, that we have available. Many different ecotypes. We grow out hundreds of thousands of plants. And in fact, for this year's planting, which for the plug planting that we're going to do in our fields, which will be starting here next week, we're going to be planting out 200,000 plugs in our amplification fields, to give you a sense for that. So those plugs are being produced at our nursery. And I think a lot of attention in recent years has talked about the importance of clean nursery practices, right? Phytophthora is a big deal in native plant nursery, so you have to use clean nursery practices in order to make sure that you're not spreading non-native diseases in your restoration projects. So our nursery operation includes phytosanitary procedures. Just like with the seed that we produce, that through contract grows, we also do the same thing with our nursery operation. And it also is an avenue that we use to do germination trials. So we're doing some work. Some of our grants include germination trials, which is pretty fun to do in the nursery. So another sort of interesting part of our operation is our demonstration garden, right? And so with that demo garden, we like that demo garden to try to represent everything that we grow out on the farm. So it's a pretty robust garden. We have about an acre that we use for that. With that, we trial new species, right? We try things that we haven't tried before out in the demo garden to get a sense for that. Sometimes we use that to do these small plot amplifications when there's just very limited amounts of seed. We'll do, maybe a 400 square foot plot sometimes if it's something really special. We also use the seed from that for our nursery operation. And we collect a lot of data on plant phenology, and I'll talk about that in a minute out in the demo garden. And then we use that to make observations about, pollinators and pests and pathogens and things like that. And you can really tell in the demo garden, like the plants that are full of insects, right? So those are good insect-free plants just by common sense, and that helps us to inform, seed mix design and things like that. So in the demo garden, we go out and collect data on a weekly basis, at least after it's planted, right? And so a big thing that we look at is the germination. How long did it take after the seed has been planted and wetted for it to germinate? So we collect data on a weekly basis. We categorize that into 1 to 25%, 25 to 50, et cetera, et cetera. Gives us some good information. How quickly does the material bloom and when does it start to set seed is all part of that data collection. And this goes to both inform our farming practices, but also helps to inform seed mix design as well. And then luckily our demonstration garden coordinator, Joan Bosque, she's a fabulous photographer, so she takes photos of different life stages of the plants, right? So she produces these spectacular photos that we enjoy so much. Okay, so now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some projects. So hold your hats. Okay, so I think all of us are familiar with the Klamath Dams Removal Project, right? It's described as the, it's described as the largest dams removal project in U.S. history. So far, yeah. And maybe the world, right? It could be the largest dams removal project in the world. I'm not sure, but it's really impressive, right? And I think it's a project where it was done correctly, right? So the Yurok tribe worked for years collecting wildland seed prior to this project being constructed, right? So they went out, ended up collecting more than 100 different species out in this watershed years in advance, allowing a number of different growers to be able to grow and produce the seed, this locally sourced, genetically appropriate seed for that project. They did the appropriate advanced planning for that, which was awesome, right? So we had a contract with Res, which was the restoration contractor, so we ended up growing out a bunch of plants for them. But one of the things that we grew out also was this Lupinus microcarpus densiflorus, the chick lupin. And I thought you guys might enjoy the photo on the left is the field, in our amplification field, and the photo on the right, is the lupins growing out on the restored Klamath River. So pretty cool project for sure. So anyway, we need to do more projects like that, right? It has the appropriate advanced planning. They had a pretty sort of interesting strategy with this project too. So they wanted to make sure that as the reservoir levels were lowered, they immediately put native seed down, right? So we'd limit the recruitment of weedy vegetation coming in, right? So kind of a pretty good advanced thinking process, and so far, I understand it's doing very well. So we're doing lots of collaborations with various folks. We have 3 really nice grants with BLM right now. Working with Brooke Thompson and the Reading office of the Battle Creek Restoration Project, large-scale restoration project, Battle Creek is a tributary to the Sacramento River, and so Brooke has had folks from the Seeds of Success program come out and essentially collect the seed from the watershed that we're now amplifying and that are going to go back into that site. So another great example of a correctly done project. We have another project that we call it the California Plant Materials Project. We have the distinct honor of being able to work directly with Christina Lund on that project. And just had to show this picture. So this is in the steps right out the door here last year at the conference, and the seed that we're growing out right now arrived at the same time. So here we are, Michelle Ranieri and Christina and myself and Haley Holgate, opening up this box of seed. It was like Christmas, It was just so much fun, right? So anyway, great project, just getting that underway. We're going to be growing out native plants and amplifying native seed. So really a great project. We're doing germination studies as part of that too, to try to figure out, how to grow out things like manzanita, And then we just found out here last week that our let's see, it's not a contract, it's a grant, it's an agreement. We have an agreement with BLM on the Cosumnes River watershed. It's a seed amplification project for the Cosumnes River Preserve. So with that, we're going to be collecting wildland seed. We're going to be growing out plants. We're going to be doing amplifying native seed. So it's a really great project. That's where I did my master's thesis research. So it's particularly special, I think, to have landed this project and be in a position here now to put some of that seed, properly sourced and grown out seed, back at this spectacular preserve. Okay, so one of the really interesting projects we're working on is it's through AB 179. It's the Multi-Benefit Habitat Restoration Project in the San Joaquin Valley. There's a guy named Adam Gray, who at the time he was an assemblyman. You might have heard of Adam Gray. He just got elected to Congress. It was the last congressional election to be called. It was so close, right? And what Adam Gray did is he recognized the need for flood control work in the San Joaquin Valley and the need to do it properly. And so he basically got a $40 million line item in the state budget to go to River Partners to do habitat restoration implementation. And as part of that, we got $1.7 million of that that's dedicated to basically developing seed in the San Joaquin Valley, to implement these projects. We call it the Native Seed Research R&D is what we call it. Very large-scale project. We went through 33 collection sites last year collecting seed, covered 166,000 acres of area as part of our collection areas. Ended up making those 99 collections last year, and we're going to do a similar effort here in 2025. And if you can believe this, we're growing out 47 new ecotypes from that project from the collections from last year. So a remarkable number of things that we're trialing, and hopefully we'll get that seed available to do large-scale habitat restoration in the San Joaquin Valley and the Tulare Basin. What a great project in terms of like the many partners and collaborators on that project. We got so much help from so many people. A lot of different groups allowing us to collect that seed. For example, the monies were distributed through WCB. Got a lot of help from Westerfelt. They really allowed us onto a lot of their lands to collect, which was spectacular. So it was really a great project. Really appreciate all of the partnerships that we made and are continuing to make as part of that project. We were able to collect in these really spectacular areas. If you know the San Joaquin Valley and the Tulare Basin, most of that is, high production ag land. There's not really much habitat left, right? And so you find these areas with that desert scrub habitat that are left, and they can be spectacular, right? So we're able to collect within these little remnant populations of native habitat, which was just great. Here's a project site or a site near Buttonwillow, very pristine example of desert scrub habitat. Did lots of collections with that. So anyway, we're going to be doing lots more of the same. And again, if anyone wants to join our team, look at our job description for wildland seed collection for next year because we're going to be doing a lot more work down there. Another great project is the Hamilton City Phase 2 Riparian Restoration Project. It's 300 plus acres of riparian habitat restoration. It's a project that's done correctly. In this particular case, they're using setback levees to allow the river to basically flood into old historic floodplains, right? So using natural processes, to be able to, provide those important flood control benefits. But it does important things like groundwater recharge, right? So it's really important for us to be able to get that water not only in reservoirs, but we have to put that water back in the ground, right? So that's really important. So these floodplain restoration projects are really important for groundwater recharge. We have to store water underneath the ground. And also, of course, as we all know, or we've learned, is that these areas that with shallow water, they produce lots and lots of insects. And those insects are so important for fish. Those out-migrating salmonids, those little baby salmon that are going out, they need the invertebrates that are being produced on these floodplains, right? So a great multi-benefit project. And with that, it's the sort of the signature River Partners approach towards habitat restoration was used. It's the way River Partners does it in order to do these things at scale, use farming techniques to restore riparian habitat at scale, planting trees and shrubs in rows, kind of like an orchard. And in the areas in between the rows, they control the weeds for a couple of years. And with that, you end up with a weed-free area to then establish native herbaceous vegetation. Really, to have any shot at establishing native herbaceous vegetation, you really have to control the weeds there. And a great example of using that approach on this project. Plus, it's the second phase of this project. I think the first phase was nearly 1,000 acres, right? So this is the second phase of that. So, really good example project to follow. We're doing some work now with the East Bay Regional Parks District and the Mid-Penn Open Space District, working with Dina Roberts and Michelle Hammond on those projects. Great biologists to work with. So we're in the second year of the project. We grew out 3 items from them last year. They collected the seed from us. This year we collected the seed, so we're growing out 3 more new items. So, we're having 6 local ecotypes from the Mid-Penn that we're growing out. That seed eventually will become commercially available also, all right? So we're expanding the locally sourced material that will be available for Bay Area restoration projects. We also landed a project with the Mid-Peninsula Open Space District where folks will be collecting and providing, wildland stock seed that will then amplify on our farm, which is a great process, so more locally sourced material for habitat restoration. Another great project we're working on is the Lower Tuolumne Salmonid Habitat Restoration Program. It's with the Modesto Irrigation District, the Tulare Irrigation District, and the SFPUC. And it's another example of a project that's doing it right. So well in advance of what they think will be a whole series of restoration projects along the Tuolumne River. These areas, these old historic gravel mines will be restored back into riparian habitat. What they're doing is building a locally sourced seed program for that. So we did the first year of collections on that, and now we're growing out 6 of the species that we collected. It's been great. We work with McBain Associates on that, Applied River Sciences. John Bear has been incredible. He's a really good advocate for getting source-identified seed available in projects. He thinks about the timelines. He's been a really good advocate for that, so it's been great working with John on that project. And then we're just going to continue that, and hopefully we'll continue to grow and build a nice, library of seed that'll be available for these projects when they start to come in line in the future. Another interesting and cool project we're working on is the Lookout Slough Freshwater Tidal Restoration Project. I think it's thought of as the largest freshwater tidal restoration project in California. It's more than 3,000 acres. Most of this is going to be restored through natural processes, right? Basically, they built levees around this 3,000 acre project, cut out a bunch of sloughs, and with some hydraulic modeling basically figured out that, if you can open up some levees, and based upon the elevation, basically you can get, freshwater tidal marsh reestablished with a little bit of work out there. So anyway, but with that, they're doing some native seeding. So all of the levees were seeded around that. I think we provided like 4,000 pounds of seed for that project. So here's a little movie on some hydro seeding that went on. So kind of cool. I mean, hydro seeding is just, I'm sure most of you are familiar with it, but seed is mixed in with basically wood fiber mulch that's then spread across areas. It's commonly used on areas that have steep slopes. It's a technique that it takes more seed than other techniques, but I think it's appropriate in some cases. So anyway, it was really kind of great to be associated with such a large, important restoration project. Also working on the East Table Bluffs Grassland Restoration Project. It's a WCB funded project with the Mattole Restoration Council. Working with Christina Cortez on that project. I think she's supposed to be here somewhere today. So, yeah, all right, there she is. Good. Okay. Anyway, we're amplifying 9 different species over a couple of years with that project. I think there's several seed companies that are helping out with that project. So, a great one. It's going to expand the availability of source-identified seed on the North Coast, right? So we heard a project or two describe that today, and so it'll be great that eventually there'll be more seed available for restoration on the North Coast. One of my favorite projects that we're working on, it's with the California Association of Resource Conservation Districts. They call it the Climate Resilient Restoration Project, and with that project, we get the honor of working with most of the RCDs in California. And with that, we work with the RCDs, kind of work with them, train them on how to collect wildland seed. They then give us that seed, and then we amplify that seed and give it back to them for their restoration projects. It's a great avenue to provide source-identified material. As part of it, I think we're starting to form what we're kind of starting to call the North Bay Native Seed Collaborative. I'll talk about that in a minute, but it's really another one of these model projects for expanding and providing locally sourced material. And so as part of the project, we developed this pretty cool 4-page brochure. Haley and Michelle put that together, really nice publication. Really sort of lays out the process for properly collecting seed. The screenshot on the right is it's just one of several meetings that we had. Will Spengler at the Gold Ridge Resource Conservation District, he assembled all these people. He's got a list of 45 people from different organizations that are all contributing seed as part of that will then go and be part of this, that we're amplifying and then becomes part of, again, what we're sort of starting to call the North Bay Native Seed Collaborative. And the approach that we're using on this project is an approach that we use often at Heritage Growers, where we're growing out things in 1/10 of an acre increments. It's a size that we can bite off. It's kind of small enough to accommodate a reasonable collection, not a small collection, but a reasonable collection. If you get around 10 or 13,000 live seeds in a collection, you're able to plant out a 1/10 of an acre plot with plugs. So it's kind of it's a way to sort of get things started. It's large enough that we can use mechanized equipment, So, and most of the time we can produce enough seed to then take the seed that's produced off of that and then grow that out and go much bigger and directly seed. So anyway, it's what we're doing for the CARCD project and what we do often in our contract grows. We do a lot of work with the Xerces Society, a great organization. I've been working on this Monarch Kits program for a long time with Xerces, working with Jessa K. Cruz. If any of you have ever worked with Jessa, she's a fabulous biologist, really great to work with. So what that is that it's a program where Xerces has funding to grow out monarch habitat, nectar plants, and milkweed that they then allow people to put in an application for, where they might be able to pick up, say, 1,000 plants, and they plant those plants on working lands, in hedgerows and things like that. I think it's a pretty effective program. It's maybe part of the reason why we're getting a little bit of a rebound from the monarch butterfly, perhaps. And then we've done other great things with Xerces, working on germination trials to figure out, for example, how to grow California milkweed, kind of a tough species. It's one that has a really high level of dormancy. I think we had tested some of that seed, and it had like more than 90% dormancy in that. So trying to figure out how to grow it. It's very sensitive. It's a sensitive species. So we figured out how to sort of use like a paper lining in a deep pot. That seems to have worked pretty well. So we've kind of cracked the code a little bit on California milkweed. Doing a great project with the National Park Service. It's a sort of a research-related project for post-fire landscapes. Working with Steve Buckley, fabulous guy. Been working with Steve for many, many years, trying to figure out, how can we figure out a way to grow substantial amounts of seed for the National Park Service. He was always he says, we're going to do it. We're going to find a mechanism. We're going to do it. And so we worked, and finally we found a mechanism to get a large project going with NPS. Really an honor to work with the National Park Service, right, to produce source-identified native seed for their lands. And so we're growing out plants for them. We're growing out seed for them. We're also going to be, reporting on what we do. We're going to unlock some of the knowledge that's held so tightly. How do you grow out this native seed? Why do so few people know how to do it? Well, we're going to write some of this up, right? And so we're going to share that knowledge. So hopefully we can get, many heritage growers out and growing the seed out in the future. Anyway, great project. Another really great project is the Dos Rios Riparian Restoration Project. It's a 1,600-acre restoration project at the confluence of the San Joaquin and Tuolumne rivers. It's actually California's first new state park in 13 years. Just got dedicated here last year. Spectacular park. It's gotten a lot of press. It's a signature project for River Partners. We got the governor out for that. Looks like I misspelled San Joaquin there. Sorry about that. But it includes some things like a native use garden, which is great, so we're incorporating, native use materials in as part of it. It's another one, too, that where the River Partners method of, getting the trees and shrubs established there, in these rows, and then doing the weed control in between, and then a couple of years later, drilling in these native grasses and forbs. It's really remarkable. Like with the California Native Grassland Association, we did a field trip out to Dos Rios and sort of toured folks around and kind of picked a random location where we just got out into the restoration project. And I mean, it was remarkable. Like the nearly 100% cover within this restoration project, right? The trees, the shrubs, the grasses, the forbs were all native. I remember one guy said, wow, this is like a movie, and it was just a random location, right? So again, this idea of like controlling those weeds before you get the native herbaceous vegetation in the ground is really essential for having a high level of success establishing native herbaceous veg. So a great project. Another great project we're working on is with Caltrans. It's the Willits Bypass Freshwater Wetlands Project. Hanford ARC is the restoration contractor that we're working with on that project. It's a large-scale project. I don't know, some of you might have remembered, 10 or 15 years ago when you used to drive on Highway 101 in the summertime, and sometimes it would take an hour to get through the town of Willits. So Caltrans ended up finally doing this bypass, to avoid all of that, to avoid that traffic jam. But in the process, they had to build, this flyover into the Little Long Lake Valley, and with that impacted, a fairly substantial amount of wetlands. So Caltrans, as part of that project, ended up basically setting aside the entirety of that valley in order to get permission to collect to in order to get permission to build the project. And so with that, Caltrans is doing it right in terms of habitat restoration. Long-term project. We're out there collecting material, growing that out, amplifying that on our farm, putting that material back, back into the site. So another good example of the right way to do habitat restoration with source-identified native seed. And we're doing all this work with lots and lots of partners and collaborators, right? So we're working with federal, state, and local agencies together, to be able to do these projects well. Private industry, nonprofits, tribes. We also do a lot of field tours, and so we'll do like a Caltrans tour, or a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service tour, or a BLM tour. And so if any of you might be interested in tagging along on some of those tours, come by, and we'll get your contact information, and we'll show you sort of in the field what we're doing and how we're doing it. It's one thing to hear a talk on this, but to actually see it is quite different, right? So we encourage you to come out. And one thing I just wanted to show you, this last final picture here. That's last year. Darn it, who's our guy from? Bruce Delgado. Yeah, right on. Do you remember Bruce Delgado came up here? He was singing songs and all that stuff. Just a character, right? So Bruce decides to take a nap here in our field, during the field tour. Yeah. So anyway, I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Hi. I love what you do, and I love how you've grown. I want to provide everybody some information that you probably haven't thought of. You're doing work for salmon, but you're doing work for turtles, and we're on Turtle Island. So the Southwest should be listed as endangered, but they're going to be listed as threatened, and, should be. And so are the Northwest. But what we're finding from our research is that the native species allow this species, which should be listed, and a state-sensitive species, to get up into the upland to nest. And by conservation people, it is the only ecotonal animal that goes between the terrestrial and the aquatic, and it goes quite a ways into the terrestrial, like the tiger salamanders. So when you're doing all this work for the plants, you're also doing work for the turtles. So also, if people in here are finding any data on nesting turtles in the native plants, I'd really like to hear about it, because I'm going to start amplifying our research on the turtles to try to do more for their conservation. So thanks for all the turtles on Turtle Island, our only native turtle.
Yep, thank you, Michelle, for all your great work.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm curious to what extent, if any, are you seeing there being certain plants that, because you're growing them in the Central Valley and not where they've been collected, that they don't grow, or they're just not producing sufficient seed? Is that something that you're seeing for some of the plants?
Yeah, so for example, you can get some coastal ecotypes of Elamus glaucus, for example, that really they don't produce seed very well, if you take them from the coast and bring them into the valley. In some cases it can be, you can have two populations that are, one watershed on the coast, an adjacent watershed on the coast, two different populations, one produces seed pretty well in the Central Valley, and other one doesn't. So yeah, we do see that sometimes, yep.
Yeah, thank you again for your presentation. It's been great. In this burgeoning field of the native seed collection and amplification, has there been yet any utilization of citizen science groups, any groups in facilitating that, or actually being out in the field, some even, in your efforts, at least at Heritage?
I I think there's a lot of citizen science that's being applied in a kind of a more informal way. I mean, there's a lot of like smaller versions of what we do, you know. So I think it's, you know, we haven't really gotten a lot of volunteers out yet to help at Heritage Growers, but it's something we're interested in. You know, getting folks out to the demonstration garden to come out. I mean, we are collecting data on bumblebee use. It goes into the Bumblebee Atlas, right, as part of that. So that's a little example of some citizen science type stuff that we're doing. But I think it's like some of these groups that are doing smaller scale restoration, I think that's really where that comes in. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Hi, Pat.
Hey.
2 quick questions. I'll just ask them both at the same time. You can answer them. What kind of futzing around do you have to do with the soil in the farm? And what's one of the weirdest plants to grow as a you know, what's the word? The amplification crop.
Yeah.
And what's kind of why is it one of the weirdest species?
2 good questions. You know, we haven't futzed around yet. You know, so we're working on these incredible vinoplanes. You know, class 1 ag soils, but it's something that we need to do. Actually, it's just that we're a nonprofit, and you know, we're going to get to the point where so part of it is we'll need to. Well, actually, come to think of it, we have done a little bit of soil. We did so. There's one area in our demonstration garden, actually, the little putzing there, where it had been used as a borrow site and for a house that was built, this historic house, and with that, we couldn't get much to grow there. So we actually, within that particular location, we put calcium or gypsum and compost in that particular location. So, but so far we haven't because we have these incredible soils out there. But we want to. It's something that in order for us to bring the cost of the seed down, we have to increase the yields, right? So you can imagine if something produces 100 pounds an acre or 5 pounds an acre, well, the stuff that produces 5 pounds an acre is 20 times more expensive, right? As part of that. So things that we're growing out that's interesting. I mean, the milkweeds are always really interesting. They're always full of insects. It's great to see monarch butterflies. This idea that we have to, harvest the seeds by hand is pretty spectacular. I'd say milkweeds. Yeah.
Great talk, thank you. I'm really curious with like these many different partner groups that you've built relationships with, how you approach like cultivating trust and also balancing the different projects with different partner groups.
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of time, and I think it takes a lot of honesty as part of it, right? So it's like, so we do a lot of these contract grows, and a lot of times it's an experiment, basically, and so we kind of make sure that the partner or the collaborator that we're working for, they understand that there's a decent chance we're not going to produce seed here. This has never been done before. Or we're growing out a new ecotypes, and there's differences in the yields with different ecotypes, right? So if we're trying something that's never been tried before, we make sure that they understand that we're in this together. It's we're both mad scientists, if you will, trying to figure this stuff out. So I think that's really important to be as honest as possible with that. Yeah. So, yeah.
Hi, it's really great to hear about so many projects you're working on. I just have a small question. I don't understand why direct seeded plants would produce less or later seed than plugs if they were planted at the same time.
Yeah, I don't quite understand either. But I think, part of it too is like you end up getting a denser stand, I think, when we direct seed. So, for example, Stipa pulchra, that's direct seeded. You get a much denser stand. I think you end up getting a higher yields with that than you do with plug planted. I mean, we're already planting 25,000 plugs per acre, right? So it's like at some point we got to stop, right? So I think a lot of it has to do with the density of the stands, I think, and maybe at the end of the day also you get a better root system that develops. We end up we plant the seeds in the fall. As soon as they're wetted, they'll start to germinate. They start to build a root system. We plant the plugs kind of January, February, because that allows us to have saturated soils or wet soils, so we don't have to irrigate. So maybe that's part of it too. Perhaps if we planted those plugs in the fall, maybe it would be closer. I don't know. Maybe. Yeah.
You mentioned that some of your permit requests are rejected, and is that because you're growing for commercial purposes or for some other reason?
I kind of made that up. I think you could be rejected, right? It's a process. Basically, the idea is that in order to, it makes it a lot harder to be able to get permission to collect if you have to go through a long and drawn out permit process. Sometimes there are some offices so BLM has some offices that, for example, aren't well staffed, and in order for us to get a permit to collect with that, we'd have to sort of call in a favor because they're going to have to go out with us to go and visit those collection sites and things like that. And so that's an area where we okay, I don't think we have the time or the resources that are available to try to ask a favor to be able to go and collect. So some of it I think is more along the lines of we're going to take the low-hanging fruit, because we only have limited amounts of time and don't have funds for application fees and things like that. So yeah, so it's kind of it's the amount of work that it takes really more than anything else that sort of discourages us, and we're not, and yeah, so.
Hi, Pat.
Hey. Oh.
Hello,
there
Pat.
you go. Oh, hey,
Yeah.
Ed, how are you?
Hey, awesome presentation.
Oh, thank you. Yours
I
was
wanted
great
to
too.
hear what creative things you're doing with all the residual off your farm production.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so the material that we produce that doesn't make the grade, we call that seconds, right? And then if it's so we sort of hold on to that for various reasons. We're spreading that into weedy locations on River Partners projects. So we take those seconds and put them along levee slopes and things like that. There's an adjacent farmer that we work with that takes that material also, and he spreads it on his lands too. So, it's really good stuff. I take these seconds and I mix it together and I give it to my friends in these wildflower seed mixes, and they work great, But as you know, Ed, if we don't meet the weed control content and what have you, we can't sell it. So yeah.
Yes, I was concerned about it. Yeah, we have a lot of weed that comes out as a byproduct, and sometimes the salty residual from Atroplex or something, and that we take to commercial composters, but we don't keep that on the farm.
Yeah.
A certain amount of discretion there.
Yeah. We're still working on that, right? It's just we're kind of bound, as you know, Ed, by the rules or whatever. But when we don't sell it, we have the option to be able to use it. Sometimes we try to donate the material to folks that they understand that this is going to have higher weed content than say the primary stuff that we sell, as well. So yeah. Any more questions?
Yeah, what a great example of the theme of this conference, collaboration, partnerships, and all that. I think this is a really fantastic, great work that Heritage Growers is doing, and great talk. So thank you very much, Pat.